It was against the rules to show a gay character in film or a trans character or a lesbian character, a queer character of any kind, unless they came to a bad end. It had to be a moral statement.
Hey y'all, welcome back to Queer 101, the podcast where we talk about any and everything under the sun, including queer culture, queer art, queer literature. I'm Peppermint.
And I'm Hugh Ryan, aka Hugh the Historian.
That's right. Hugh, I feel like we have so much to talk about, and I love that we get to just dive deeper and deeper into these conversations.
I know. It's not surprising you and I have a lot to say once we get going. But
It's true.
I had something I wanted to share first before we get into it. Is that okay?
Yeah, please hit me. What is up?
Okay, so we've been talking a lot about resistance and fascism and the world that we are in today, and I've been
Yes.
thinking a lot about what is my role, not just as like doing this podcast with you, not just writing my books, but like what can I be doing on a daily basis? And there's always more, right?
What can
There's
you
so
be
many more
doing?
things. But in the last few weeks, I've been asked by a bunch of people to join some mentorship
The
programs, and
Chippendales.
I've
Oh,
been really
okay.
enjoying this. Getting into working with young scholars. I'm working with the DC History Center, their Totman Fellowship, which promotes history of queer people and people of color in DC. And I'm also working with the Queer Art Mentorship Program here in New York to mentor up and coming nonfiction writers. And I'm really
Have you started
excited.
yet?
No, they just invited me in. So I know who I'm mentoring for the Topman Fellow, a young scholar who I met a couple of times before. And I don't know yet who I'm working with in queer art mentorship. It's all new to me, though. I'm so used to working alone in my little office or like in a library or an archive where it is completely silent and I speak to no one, talk to no one, and go home with my little pictures of documents.
Hey, I work alone.
Yeah, exactly. But I'm learning. I'm like, I don't know. Have you ever had a mentor?
Yes, I believe that I have, but never really an official mentorship. But I do think that they are obviously great. I mean, they are the last bastion, I think, of the sort of community-minded um, existence that because I'm sure that mentors have existed since there was a thing called students and teachers. And I think that is, the whole it takes a village thing. It does, and at
Yeah.
least takes a mentor if there's not going to be a village. That's what
Yeah.
I think.
I agree. I think I was too scared when I was younger to really have a mentor. It involves like opening up a little bit, and being vulnerable. And I
Hmm.
definitely have people that I learned from. Absolutely. And people who I took so much from. But that kind of like close relationship, like I closed myself off a little bit to it. So I don't know. It's gonna be a new thing for me.
Well, I love that. Listen, I think that we have to do. I was talking to a couple of friends today, and we've all come to the conclusion that we are going to move to a communal living, and little commune, and have our, you know, somebody will grow the plants, and somebody will wash
Somebody
the
better
dishes.
grow me little packets of ramen. Do
Somebody
those
better
come on
do it,
plants?
honey. And maybe they do. If, these days in 2025, 26, 27, you never know what's going to they'll be able to grow on trees. But
That actually is true.
but that is like, I was talking to a friend of mine who I work closely with sometimes, and they were like, yeah, I think we're gonna like do a lot more bartering because they're
Yeah.
an artist, and they work in fashion, and so they were thinking that they have their clients, and they'll probably just end up bartering with their clients. And they started with one
Wow.
particular client, and they're like, hey, I'll do you, you do me,
That is
and
great.
then we're good to go. Then we don't have to have like some transaction I mean, there's still a transaction, but we don't have to have like, something that's like taxed or like, has this fee and this subscription and this membership and this blah, da, 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 da. Just like, I'll do
Doesn't have
yours,
all
you do
these
mine.
layers of middleman in the way. It's like this direct.
Middleman. That is what it is all about. Middle.
Oh, I love that. That's
Yeah,
actually,
I
I
think
think, a
it's pretty
good
cool.
segue into our discussion today because that was so much when we were talking with Tourmaline about Marcia, this kind of like dreaming that Marcia employed, this freedom dreaming to think beyond like the world today. And I think that's exactly what you're talking about is like getting together and dreaming about like what we could have that is otherwise, based off of what we already have communally.
And what is it when dreams and communities come together? What do you get? You get films.
Syphilis. Films.
Yeah.
Films. Yes, that was going to be my other answer.
Films
Films.
about syphilis.
My favorite
Before we
genre.
jump in, before we jump in, listen, if you are just joining us now, and you are just joining us for the first time, then where have you been, honey? We are episodes and episodes into our newly relaunched podcast, honey. Make sure that you click like and subscribe and the notification bell so that you too, if you're listening to this if you're watching this on YouTube, can be notified every single time we have a new video, darling. And if you are just joining us this week, no worries, honey, because we will catch you up. Hugh and I have been talking about the new bestseller, which is on I put it on my shelf. I forgot to take it down. Marcia by the effervescent and ever so fabulous Miss Tourmaline. There it is. Thank you so much, Hugh. And it really gave us a lot to talk about and to think about. And so we're going to continue the conversation. But if you missed that first one and that interview, a portion of the interview with Tourmaline, then you can go back to where you're listening to this now, a few episodes, and catch the first episode with Tourmaline. And then you can also head over to our alstora.com book club, where we have the full interview with Tourmaline, and we get to hear all the tidbits and details about writing that book. But today...
Last week we were talking a lot about music. That came up so much in that book and what music inspired us and what music meant something to us. It made me think a lot about what other parts of queer culture we had access to, either as young people or what was there before us, and particularly film, representation in film and television, and how important that was, and also at times, especially when like we were younger, how harmful it could be, and how Marcia herself ends up in films and documentaries, and it just seems really important to me right now that we be discussing that kind of like queer culture from our history.
I really do think about that because I think of like the performing arts and theater, live theater, which obviously the whole notion of the film industry and movies, rap per se, sort of obviously is the next page or the next generation of. And obviously people agreeing to do films and making films and putting together films knew that their story would be sort of immortalized, that they'd put their story down in celluloid and then it would be forever available. But I don't think that they realized that the film, the actual like moment, it was a snapshot of what was going on in that time. Everything from the way the film was produced to the types of lights they used, the costuming, the mannerisms, the types of language or like how they spoke about something, their approach to making the entire production has something to say about the times that they're in. And I think the thing that's really interesting is in the golden age of cinema, we had the studio system, which dictated so much about the film industry. Everything, not so much. Everything, way beyond, like, let alone the movie you were watching. Like, they dictated everything around it, the culture around the industry. They established the actual industry. And so they had a lot of power.
They did.
And they became probably like for a minute, probably for like a blip, and still so, but for like a blip. And okay, hear me out here. They became they replaced the church in terms of political power. I know that sounds, listen. I'm not saying, it's a controversial thing. My opinion is that in a day and time where in America, when where the culture was no longer set by the church, because for a moment in time the church was setting the culture, the morals, the the practices, the traditions, the
Even the
customs.
kinds of like stories we knew to tell all came from the church at one point.
Exactly. Then came film. Now theater was there, and but theater could be was obviously something that was only it was very particular. It was an acquired taste. Everybody couldn't access it. You'd had to be able to travel there. They wouldn't allow. I mean, there were certain people they wouldn't allow into the theater, or even
Yeah.
socially there was a certain social standing that wouldn't allow people in, that they just didn't have access. There was lots of barriers to the theater.
It was
Whereas
thought
to
that it was
films,
inappropriate for women to go to the theater, children to go to the theater.
exactly.
These
But
things
when
were
movies
considered.
came out, they were like, we need as many people to buy a ticket as possible. So come on through. If you can get to the theater, get through. And so I
Yeah.
think that
And that's why
film
those early
clearly,
movies are so exciting
yeah.
to me. Because they really did want
How
everybody there
so?
and they wanted to try
Yeah.
everything. And it's not, for a few years before we had to get things like codes, like our R ratings and things like that that start to say like, oh, who
Hmm.
can see this film? What's allowed in film? But I think you're right that kind of power that the film industry developed over like, going from the silent films to the talkies and the teens and the 20s and into the 30s gave them the ability to set the stage for what conversations we would have nationally, for what we thought about each other as people, for what we thought gay people were, especially. I mean, the Hays Code, which comes about in the 1930s, is written by a bunch of Catholic priests and lay people who are really involved in the church. And it basically set the grounds for what could be shown in film from the 30s all the way up into the 70s and still had ramifications after that. It's the reason why you would not see a positive portrayal of queer people in films, most films, in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. It was against the rules to show a gay character in film or a trans character or a lesbian character, a queer character of any kind, unless they came to a bad end. It had to be a moral statement.
Hmm.
And I think that's part of the long tail, the reason why we didn't see any really great queer characters for so long.
I think you're 100% right, and we know the power of film. It's so funny. Reminds me of how what I've heard through the. It's not so much the Hays Code because everybody was aware of the Hays Code at the time. That's how they operated. But they also like I think about Apple products and Apple phones, which I don't have one. But like villains apparently contractually are not allowed to have an iPhone, whereas only heroes are allowed to if they're going to
Yeah.
use an iPhone, only heroes can have them in modern day stories, like it made filmed during today's time. But I think that the reason why the Hays Code held so much, and I'm not diverting, but I think the reason why the Hays Code held so much weight and water, and why the Catholic Church rushed in, because they knew the power of film. And I think the birth of the nation as a film, being able to set the culture and reintroduce the idea of the Klan, and then have the Klan become such a dominant force in terms of race and politics in our country, and the fact that the birth of a nation, a film, reintroduced that back into the zeitgeist, because the Klan was not a force to be reckoned with prior to the birth of a nation. And
Yeah, and
so
that's
the birth of a nation.
1915. That's way after the Civil War. For those of you who don't know Birth of a Nation, a terrible film. Don't go watch it, but it is a
Don't
really
go see it.
important one.
Yeah. And so I think that was the beginning of really being able to see, hey, this thing about this film, it's not just a play that's on video. It is something that can really push the culture forward, and we
Yeah.
can dominate how people feel, give people a new way to communicate in that regard about groups of people,
Hmm.
about black people in that regard, about sexuality, morality, and a white woman's virtue, all this through the birth of a nation.
Hmm.
And black people as predators, black men as predators and sexual
Yeah.
predators. That was all established, really, not only established, but that was really like proliferated through that film. And they were able to
Yeah.
like really perpetuate that idea. And so I think that they were able to catch on and see, wow, this film thing is really doing something. And so you are 100% right. We were able to document so much, but especially sort of like what the queer experience was or wasn't, and what gender roles should or shouldn't be, just through film, you know.
Yeah, you can really
And
see
I
the difference. Like, there's a pre-code film called Call Her Savage, which is an amazing film. Definitely go watch it. And at one point, they're on a date, and the guy wants to impress the girl, and he wants to take her somewhere wild and crazy. So he takes her down to Greenwich Village to a bar where poets and anarchists hang out. But the bar is entirely staffed with these campy, effeminate gay men, trans women, right? This is before that language. It's the early 30s. But they are camping about, and they're wearing little maids outfits and singing and performing, and it's exciting. And the straight characters want to go there, and that's the cool and hip place. And that's what you have before the Hays Code sweeps in, right? And then after the Hays Code, I mean, I don't know about you, but like, what movies did you ever see that had queer characters in them from the 40s, 50s, 60s? Does anything come to mind?
I mean, certainly not any characters that were out. I mean, the actors were hardly out, let alone the
Right.
characters in that time. And so, no, there's not a lot that I can think of prior to that. I mean, I know that Some Like It Hot was a big sort of way around the Hays Code, and
Mhm.
only possible because they had such huge stars, Jack Lemmon and Tony Curtis. Oh my God, I'm brain fart. In it, and these were mega stars, right, at the
Yeah.
time, and so they were able to get away, per se, with being in this film, and I think it was probably Tony Curtis that like insisted. I think if I'm not mistaken,
Are you calling him
where
gay?
it no, 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 but insisted on doing the film. And it was, I think they had tried for a little while, and it was not successful until we had these big stars
Wow.
signing on, right? And so, but that's probably one of the earliest that I can think of. Is there another
Yeah.
one that you can think of post the Hays Code?
No, I was trying to think. A lot of them. I
I mean,
think.
obviously post, but like during.
Yeah, I think that the first really like great depictions of queer people on film that we get in America after that are really documentaries. Like in the 1960s, even the late
Hmm.
50s, we start to get some cool, interesting documentaries that, yeah, they're still not the most like queer positive, but they show like real people's lives, Queens at
Hmm.
Heart, The Queen, those kind of things that look into the actual experiences of queer people, particularly trans women. I mean, those are a lot of the people who get focused on in these early films. And I think that, for me, is like a moment where film starts to move back, right? But it's not until right before Stonewall. It's like the late 60s.
I think that it's really interesting that obviously trans identity doesn't have to, but can and certainly does, um, especially considering how little people were able to, sort of have their own bodily autonomy when it comes to medically transitioning. And I know that that was a dream that a lot of people talked about. Marcia talked about it in the book, obviously at a much later point. But the only thing that you could do, and especially as a young trans person starting out in transition, medical transition, or starting out in life and like coming into your transness, for myself, medical transition was like years down the road. Like I didn't have no money, I didn't know any doctors. So the only thing I really had power over was my gender expression,
Mm.
how I dressed, how I moved about the world, and what I looked like, and yada yada. And I think that is obviously a really clear indicator right off the bat to a lot of people that signifies that you're different, that you look
Right.
different, that you act different, that you have a different set of values perhaps. Whereas being gay, there's some people it's undeniable, but like there is an ability to, you know, um, in an atmosphere where safety depended on not necessarily being readable as gay or
Yeah.
trans. Being in the closet was an option that many people obviously decided to do,
Yeah.
um, and for some people it was life and death, or some people it was, I mean, literally was, and
Mm.
then for others it was you know losing their job. Their job was at stake. Back in that time, it was. I won't say it's ever easy. It's not easy to be a queer person in an atmosphere that is really persecutorial of the queer people. However, um, the option to be in the closet and not necessarily talk about or do anything to signal being gay was something that I think a lot of people opted to do for survival,
Yeah.
knowing that they would still at some point be able to have sexual connection and intimacy with their partners behind closed doors.
Hmm.
Whereas being trans for a lot of people is less a sexual thing and more about their expression. And even when you can't, and even if somebody, personally speaking, when I wasn't able to medically transition, I was still able to change my clothes, change how I
Hmm.
looked. And that is something I think was fascinating to a lot of people because they were able to detect someone's trans, and that sort of different way of living is like, let's get that on camera in these documentaries. Look at
Yeah.
these freaks. Let's go see what they're doing. But like, if the
Yeah.
gays aren't really acting gay, then you're just going to videotape a bunch of guys standing around.
Yeah, it's not interesting. And I think the like the way that this like all fucked us up, or at least, fucked me up, is like you didn't see gay characters in film and television, and so the only characters you saw were these like, okay, we're just gonna make these guys really effeminate or these women really butch, and that's gonna
And
mean
not say
gay
anything.
and not say anything. And so there kind of becomes this collapse in those years of like we do get people on screen, like Paul Lind is an example. People playing these really
Mm,
very swish characters, but the only
there's
way to
more.
express swishiness is through gender. So it's
Yeah,
like
yeah, a
sexuality
hundred.
becomes translated into gender, and then you get the
And
thing
gender
where, like, when
expression.
I was growing
Hmm.
up, gender expression in the 80s and 90s, and you get, you start to get films with gay
Hmm.
people in them, but it's like almost like the films themselves do not know what it means to be gay or to be trans. I'm thinking about Tu Wong Fu, a film that I absolutely love, really, really great. But it's like the characters sort of live as trans women while giving a speech. Noxeema Jackson, right at the beginning, gives a speech about what it
About
means,
being a
how
gay
they are
man.
not trans women, they are not transsexuals, they are not transvestites, they're fashionable gay men. And so I
And they're
think
in
that
drag the entire movie, but it really is like I think we had mentioned when we were talking about this before, that it is if it they're serving the trans presentation for
yeah,
sure, or a trans sensibility. I won't say presentation, but it's trans sensibility about that film,
yeah.
and I
And I
find
think
it
so
really
many
interesting. I oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I think so many people today are like, "What is this with this newfangled transness? We didn't have this in the 80s and 90s." And I was like, "We just had stupid language, and all of culture had smushed what it meant to be any kind of queer into one tiny little
Into
box."
gay. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, it's true. The Yeah, I do. I think I wonder if silent film had something to do with how we needed to boil people down to a visual representation, even in film. Um, and so we would take our cues on feminine versus masculine from these sort of archetype, like these archetypes that we just had to like everything you need to know about them you just get from their appearance
yep,
versus how they what they feel and what they need and what they say about themselves.
hmm
um that's where we find out more about like someone's sexuality and their desires and what they love and blah 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 blah. But until that, it's just like, oh, you're the gay one, go like this when you're
yeah,
walking, and then
yeah.
everybody knows you're gay.
And it even goes back to like the variety shows of the 19th century. The fairy was a standard character. They were effeminate,
Hmm.
they were swishy, they weren't gay or trans as we would think of them today, but they were the sort of the same way that they would put up, the drunken Irish Paddy as a stereotype of what it meant to be an Irish immigrant in America. They would put up the fairy as a queer stereotype, or the tailor-made girl, which were girls who wore tailored clothing in a masculine sort of form on stage in the early 1900s, right? These simplifications, culture has used them for so long because I think queer people, people of color, immigrants were not the ones getting to create these stories, right? They were being talked about, and sometimes they could even act them out, but they were not the ones writing the characters and imbibing them with like a real sense of who they are, which I think is what is so exciting about queer culture today, is we're actually getting to see queer people talk about what it means for them to be queer, specifically how it feels, all that internal stuff you're talking about.
Mhm. And I think it's also really radical. When we think of that time, there was a really, really, really heavy emphasis on morality and sticking to behaving this way, sticking to that behavior, not, like the sort of social ramifications and implications with regards to gendered behavior and what that also meant politically. Like a woman who had her cleavage showing was a loose woman. She was probably a
Mm-hmm.
prostitute. She didn't have like a whole profile about just how somebody's appearance might be. And I'm sure that that also played into like the queerness aspect of it. And I really do think we were talking earlier, like along with the Hays Code was like another way to control people. Of course, the church certainly wants to be able to control people's behavior and morality, which went hand in hand with McCarthyism at that same time. And I think that the Hays Code was sort of used as a tool to keep people, not only studios in line, but then also the actors, with the studio system being
Mm-hmm.
able to decide who could work and who couldn't, what was at stake, what was going to be threatened. And the fact that they were doing so much pairing of making these like Hollywood couples. And I think I watched something that was the whole obsession that we got in the 80s,
Mm-hmm.
in with like Hollywood and who was dating who and what their personal lives were, is a direct result of the manipulation
Oh.
from the studio system in the 50s and 60s, 40s, 50s and 60s, with regards to who was, like, you're gay, we know you're gay, don't tell anybody. If we find out, we're going to tell them that you're a communist, but you're dating this person now, and now you go out and go on a date. And honey, you know that gay boy did not want to be out on that date. But that's what they did, whether they were
Wow.
working or not.
Yeah, the whole gossip industry as like a way of controlling our ideas about who these people are. That's fascinating. And I think
Yeah.
that actually is a good segue into mentioning next month, for those of you who are part of the book club, who are signing up right now, if you're not already part of the book club, we're going to be talking about George Takei's memoir, It Rhymes with Decay, where he talks about McCarthyism and the threat against gay actors and how that affected him as an up and
Mm,
coming actor, because it affects all of us. All of us are
yeah.
affected by these visions that we see in culture of what it means to be gendered properly or sexually proper. Even straight people, even cis people walk around with these ideas in their. I remember, I don't know about you, but when I was a kid, it was right ear queer, left ear buccaneer. That's how you knew where to pierce your ear
For your
properly
earring?
for your
Ah.
earring. And the other big thing was whether you looked at your nails by curling them in or pointing them
Or
out.
out.
The straight guys
Yeah.
could not go like this.
I mean, I remember that for sure. But then, I mean, I feel like I'm a little older than you, just a couple of years. And I was so infatuated with like the 90s, like the late, probably late 80s, but early 90s wave of like
Hmm.
bisexuality being a thing and breaking those, and like a
Yeah.
guy wearing a pink shirt and like that whole thing, and having both ears. Like it became suddenly in the early 90s in style to have both ears pierced. uh
Hmm.
you know Prince certainly, but definitely George Michael, when it came to like an idea of ruggedness, was able to present a rugged
Exterior,
visualization,
yeah.
exterior,
Hmm.
with two earrings, which I thought was pretty cool. And so yeah, but the infatuation, the continued infatuation, which we're even seeing to this day with our elected officials, which this week we're up to like six who are being like pseudo outed, with their proclivities.
Hmm.
Um, the infatuation and the fascination by the cis straights
Hmm.
with queerness and certainly with transness today, it's always been a thing. And I think watching films like, Queen at Heart, and or Queens at Heart, I think is it Queen at Heart or Queens at Heart, whatever,
Yeah.
uh, which just shows like this utter fascination with
Hmm.
wanting to gawk at like the queers, but definitely of the trans femmes, not even the trans mask folks, the trans femmes.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's kind of a sad, it's empowering but sad nonetheless. And you're hearing these girls talking about, you know, um, in a really understandable and really sort of straightforward way, and a very plain and almost like updated way,
Hmm.
about their transition and their decisions to do so,
Yeah.
uh, and the fascination with it.
If you haven't seen Queens at Heart, really great film. Check it out. It's from 1967. It's super short. It's like 20 minutes long,
Oh
and
yeah,
it
it's
is
totally on
just
YouTube.
oh yeah, yeah. You could watch the whole thing like immediately after you listen to this. It's just 20 minutes of four trans women talking about their lives in New York City, but also talking about everything. I mean, they're talking about balls, but they're also talking
Hmm.
about like the Vietnam War. You know, they're presented as real
Balls, as in
people.
like dance competition balls.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
yes, yes. That kind of balls. To be clear, it didn't quite go that far.
Yeah. And then, of course, that made way for films like The Queen, Mother Flawless Sabrina, uh,
What an
who,
icon. I was really glad
after
I got
you,
to meet her in New York.
oh my
She
gosh,
was
I
one
mean,
who
she
was
was a
very important to
legend,
me.
obviously. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, for those of you who, once you finish watching Queens at Heart, you should make sure it's a little harder to find, but I think it has been re-released, The Queen. Uh, and it's just a wonderful, um, again, snapshot because
Hmm.
the whole show is about the film is about like leading up to this pageant, this ball, and uh everything it takes, and the queens preparing and getting their dresses together and talking about this and this and that. um and you know now we see that like it's an absolute snapshot with all of the girls getting dressed, and when they're not just them getting dressed, but their conversation with each other when they're in their hotel rooms, and what they're going to do with the money and how they're going to prepare. So many of them are talking about getting their, getting their surgery, going to get the surgery, and things like that. And
Yeah.
it's really eye opening on sort of like the state of things at that time.
Yeah. And it's like one of the first times anyone ever catches Crystal LaBeija on film, before she starts the first house and ballroom, she's in The Queen. Mother Flawless Sabrina was going around the country in the 1950s and 60s having these drag pageants in little communities, and she would use the money in local communities to fund, I mean, they didn't have these words, but housing and healthcare for trans women, the people who were in the competitions. And The Queen is a documentary about the final one, the very last competition she ever held. And when I interviewed her about it right before, maybe 2 years before she died, I asked her, how did this come about? Like, how did this film where, like, Andy Warhol, I think, is in it, and all of
As
these
a
other famous
judge.
people are
Hmm.
judging? Yeah. Yeah. How did that come about? And Flawless looked at me and said, Bobby Kennedy was a tranny chaser, or whatever
Oh
you
my
call it today.
God.
And I was like, what, girl? And she just like talked
Of
about
course.
everyone's the team, but everyone, but they were so fascinated. Bobby was fascinated. All the judges were fascinated. Everyone, the filmmakers, Renata Adler, they wanted to see these women's real lives, even if it was still sometimes obsessive, weird, uncomfortable. There are moments in The Queen that are very uncomfortable. But like you said, that
Mhm.
fascination has always been there. Even when they try to repress us and keep us out of culture, they can't help themselves but come and look. And the Queen at least gets at the interiority of those people, of their experiences, of what it was like for Minette and for Crystal and for all the other girls who are documented in that film whose lives wouldn't be documented otherwise. It's such an important film.
Because I think before that, the need to talk about this was not necessarily something publicly, was not necessarily something that people had a burning desire to do. And I think the curiosity was definitely spurred, maybe in part by some like whatever was going on with the pansy craze. Definitely as a result of the 20s and 30s in the during the Weimar Republic in Germany, and sort of like this renaissance. And we had our own renaissance here, obviously. But I do think that, you know, folks like Christine Jorgensen really gave a face to what it is to be a
Oh yeah.
sexual trans woman at that time, and really being able to see. And also the fact that she was in the military, the GI.
Hmm.
really made it an all-American sort of story.
The thing that I love about the Christine Jorgensen story, like not the film, but like her actual like life story, is that in those
Hmm.
first moments in the 50s where she like shows up after getting all of her surgeries and she lands at Idlewild Airport and the press comes out to meet her and everyone is there and there is that fascination. All of the headlines at first treated her as this exciting, like
Yeah,
scientific
lady.
marvel. Yeah, it
Yeah,
was like
and they were
we
using
can
she/her
cure every
pronouns.
disease and we can make a soldier into a beautiful woman. So that initial reaction is excitement, is, and then everybody gets phobic and weird. But it takes a few months. At first, the press is like, yeah, and it takes people being told that this is scary or strange. But at first, they're excited, and that says something I think really heartening to me about like some genuineness to people wanting to actually understand other people's lives and
It's
value them
possible.
as the people. It's possible, right? Even through all the shit that we've watched, even though, I grew up watching things like Ace Ventura, Pet Detective, and how terribly trans women were treated in that, or how terribly, the queer people were put up as like, freak shows on Maury Povich and other daytime talk shows. But in the 1950s, that very first reaction to learning about Christine Jorgensen to the public was like, this is awesome. She is super cool.
Mhm. And for more on stuff like this, people should definitely check out. After you check out all the things we list here, you should go and check out Disclosure, which really does a good job of chronicling uh, queer experiences, queer existences, but certainly obviously the trans experience on in
Hmm.
Hollywood and on film, and all these problematic things that we view as that are and were problematic, but we took them w- at best at worst with a grain of salt. We took these crumbs because that's all we were getting at that time. And we think of not only like going from the Christine Jorgensen story, which came out later in the 70s, but then also movies like Paris is Burning,
Oh yeah.
where not only were we able to see the more the queer ballroom experience for sure, the black queer ballroom experience, but then also the sort of the aspect of sex work, survival
Mm.
sex work. I think that's probably one of the first times I was able to. I can't say the first times, but one of the films that I think so accurately portrays without like in an unspoken way survival sex work, because you
Hmm.
totally know what's going on with some of those girls.
Yeah.
And they talk about it in sort of a roundabout way, but they don't really say I'm a prostitute, this is blah 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 blah. But you can certainly pick it up if you're paying attention in that film. And
Hmm.
but the need and the lack of options for so many of the girls, especially come the 80s and 90s, with movies like Paris is Burning.
Oh yeah, yeah. Thinking about this as we were prepping for this, I was trying to think of like what was my earliest memory of seeing one of those crumbs that you were talking about. Those tiny little pieces that we repurpose and we take.
Hmm.
And after a lot of thinking, I think I've landed
Yeah.
on it. Pretty sure it was Bugs Bunny dressing in
Dressed
drag
as a
to trick Elmer Fudd,
god. It's
and
Bugs
how
Bunny's
exciting
fault.
that was. It was. It was. Bugs Bunny is my root.
I love that. And I don't know that,
Okay.
I don't think that Elmer Fudd was quite so tricked about that. I just don't. I think Elmer knew what was going on. I
Mm.
think that listen, folks, we are pretty much to the end of our thing. I think that you all should go and check out all these movies that we mentioned. Other movies like Screaming Queens, which is the story of the 1966 Compton Cafe riot, rebellion, uprising,
Mhm.
all the way to 2025's Enigma, which is a really,
Oof.
really like awkward and jarring documentary that everyone must check out. We have a lot to we have a lot of things that we can look back on now. There's not so much with regards to the trans experience, although I think certainly, as you mentioned, documentaries are more over the way to go because there's a lot less mainstream things here. But I do know for sure that queer and trans people have always been here, whether you've seen us. So obviously, whether some industry is capitalizing off of our appearances and existences or not, we've been around and we always will be.
Yeah, and we are constantly making strides forward and constantly at risk too. It's like we see these moments of improvement, like with Christine Jorgensen, and then there's a fallback. And we're obviously in a time right now where, like, what was it? Just 10 years ago was the transgender tipping point, and now they're trying to like ban every gay person, every trans person from being anywhere.
They're pointing at the trans
over the
and tipping them over.
Oh God! Yeah, it's true. It's true.
Hugh, listen, I cannot believe how much time has passed when we talk about this stuff, like you said at the beginning of the episode. And there's a whole lot more to talk about, especially with regards to the influence of Marsha P. Johnson. And, I'm just really happy that we're able to do this and continue our talk next week.
Same. Remember, we will be back every Tuesday. You can find Pep and I wherever you get your favorite podcasts. So please listen, like, subscribe, drop a comment. Let us know what was the first crumb you saw of queer life that made things possible for you, or what's a film or documentary that meant something to you. And we'll be back next Tuesday.
Thank you so much for joining us today.
This podcast is part of Pride House Media, hosted by us, Peppermint and Hugh, produced and edited by Josh Rosenzweig, with original music composed by Nell Balaban.
If you enjoyed this episode, then don't forget to subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts. And while you're there, leave us a rating and a review. It really helps others discover the show.
You can stay connected and join the conversation by following us at Peppermint 24/7 or write to us at questions@queer101podcast.com.
Thank you for listening. And remember, our history is your history. Stay proud, stay curious, and we'll see you next time on Queer 101.